Pisces. Have you ever stepped into a phase of life where everything on the outside feels quiet, yet on the inside, it feels like something is being carefully weighed? No noise, no obvious signs. Just a quiet sense that it may be time to look back at a few things from a different angle. Sometimes life doesn't give answers right away. It simply places questions in front of you, questions deep enough that you can no longer just pass them by. Questions about boundaries, about fairness, about how you've been treating yourself lately. This video isn't here to deliver conclusions. It's simply a story told slowly so each Pisces can listen inward and notice what's gradually becoming more important in this season of life. And everything often begins with a silence that carries more weight than you might expect. A Pisces. There are moments in life when everything on the surface still looks normal. Days keep moving. The rhythm of life continues. People around you laugh and talk the same way they always have. Yet somewhere inside, you begin to sense that the silence has changed. It's no longer a comfortable pause meant for rest. It carries weight, as if something unseen is being placed on the scale, waiting for you to look at it honestly. No one is reaching out. There's no clear announcement, no sign big enough to name, just a quiet feeling that you no longer want to skim past yourself the way you once did. Pisces has always experienced the world through the heart. You understand life through subtle shifts, through glances, through what's left unsaid. But when silence starts to carry weight, the heart shifts into a different rhythm, slower, deeper, and more honest. You begin to wonder why certain familiar things suddenly feel heavy, why relationships that once felt safe no longer bring that same sense of ease, why choices that once fit now feel misaligned with the person you're becoming. This silence doesn't demand answers. It doesn't push. It simply stands there, observing. Like a mirror with no judgment, only reflection. You may start to notice how often you've placed other people's emotions first, how naturally you've learned to soften the atmosphere, to keep the peace, to carry the heavier part so everything else can move along smoothly. But eventually, the body and the soul begin to speak in their own way. Not with words, but with a more serious attention toward yourself. As if something inside quietly says, it's time to pause and look more closely. Pisces, when life asks whether you're ready to see things as they truly are, it isn't a test. It isn't asking you to change overnight. And it isn't forcing you into a major decision. It's simply an invitation to step out of autopilot, an invitation to question what you've been silently accepting, an invitation to return to the center of your own life. This kind of weighted silence often appears when you've gone too far to return to who you once were, but haven't fully stepped into the next chapter yet. It's a crossing point, a space where things aren't fully clear, yet no longer completely blurred. And within that space, Pisces learns how to sit with their emotions, without pushing them away, without labeling them right or wrong, simply listening with respect for the self. Because right here, when silence begins to carry weight, you are not being pulled into darkness. You are being invited into a more refined form of maturity, a place where what comes next needs to be seen with clarity, with compassion, and with a level of honesty you may not have offered yourself before. And this is where the story of Pisces in this chapter of life truly begins. When people hear the word legal, they often think of rules, paperwork, or something cold and tense. But for Pisces, this idea carries a very different meaning. It's more like an invisible line, not drawn on paper, not spoken out loud, yet still there, more clearly than you might expect. It's the line between what you quietly accept and what you silently endure, between empathy and slowly abandoning yourself, between kindness that comes from the heart and sacrifice that leaves you drained. Pisces isn't usually skilled at setting boundaries from the start. You trust your intuition. You believe that if you understand deeply enough, things will naturally find their balance. And most of the time, you choose to step back, not because you're weak, but because you don't want to hurt anyone. But eventually, you begin to sense an imbalance, not through logic, but through a lingering heaviness. It might be a comment that seems harmless, yet repeats itself again and again. A behavior that crosses a line you once allowed, simply because you told yourself, it's probably fine. Or a relationship where you're always the one who understands, the one who yields, the one who waits. And then one day, You realize you're standing in a very familiar place, yet you no longer feel respected the way you once did. This truth doesn't show up to accuse anyone. It doesn't point fingers. It doesn't pass judgment. It simply stands there, quietly, waiting for you to be honest enough to look at it. Sometimes the people who cross your boundaries don't mean any harm. They've just grown used to you always being there, always understanding, always giving a little more. And sometimes you realize that you've given more than was necessary. Not because you were forced, but because you believe that love worked that way. But love doesn't require erasing yourself. Emotional fairness isn't about deciding who's right or wrong. It's about recognizing when your heart deserves to stand on equal ground with someone else's. That old stories tend to resurface during this phase, not to pull you back into the past, but to be seen through a more mature lens. You may notice your questions changing, no longer asking, "Did I make someone upset?" but instead, "Is this hurting me?" And that very small shift creates a profound change inside. Legal, at its deepest level, isn't about punishment. It's about restoring order. Order within your emotions. Order in how you allow others into your inner world. Order in how you value yourself. When truth asks permission to step into the light, it doesn't make noise. It doesn't demand immediate action. It simply brings a new awareness that you're allowed to pause, to adjust, and to choose again. And Pisces, that isn't becoming cold or distant. It's learning how to love with boundaries. A kind of love soft enough to heal, yet steady enough to protect who you are. After boundaries begin to take shape, something else quietly starts to shift inside Pisces. It's the way you listen to yourself. Before, your intuition felt like a thin layer of mist, present but easily blended into emotions, memories, and unnamed desires. You felt a lot, yet often doubted what you felt, then found reasons to brush it aside. But this phase feels different. Your intuition no longer shows up rushed or unclear. It slows down, it goes deeper, and it carries a sense that's hard to deny. It's not a loud voice, not a sudden alarm. It's a calm kind of clarity, as if something inside has finally sat down, looked directly at everything, and said, "This no longer fits." You don't feel the need to explain as much anymore. You don't have to convince yourself that you're being too sensitive. And you no longer wait for someone else to validate that your feelings make sense. Because you begin to recognize what's real and what's simply a pattern that's gone on too long. Some relationships aren't wrong. They've just reached a moment where the roles need to change. Some choices were right at another time, but no longer reflect who you are now. And intuition helps you see that, not through emotional intensity, but through a gentle kind of awareness. You start noticing small signals you once ignored. The weight in your chest when certain topics come up. The unexplained exhaustion after familiar conversations. The longer pause than usual after you say, "I'm fine." These signals aren't asking you to act immediately. They simply want to be acknowledged. They want you to trust that your body and your inner world are trying to communicate with you in the most honest way they can. Pisces, for a long time, you believed kindness meant endurance. That loving meant staying, even when it left you drained. That understanding meant placing yourself to the side. But now, your intuition begins to redraw boundaries, very subtly. It shows you that you can care without sacrificing yourself. You can listen without carrying what isn't yours. You can love while still remaining whole. And in the moment you allow yourself to trust that feeling, a quiet shift takes place. You stop justifying what hurts you. You stop searching for reasons to remain in situations that no longer nourish you. You stop questioning why you feel the way you do, not because you've become harder, but because you've become more honest. At its deepest level, intuition isn't a prediction. It isn't a warning. It's wisdom, gathered from what you've lived, what you've felt, and what you've survived. When it begins to speak clearly, it isn't a sign of instability. It's a sign of inner maturity. And from here, Pisces begins to step into a phase where choices are no longer driven by the fear of loss, but by respect for the self. After your intuition begins to speak more clearly, Pisces slowly realizes something deeply important. Truth doesn't arrive to hurt you. Many people grow up believing that truth always comes with loss. The loss of a relationship, the loss of a belief, the loss of a version of themselves that once felt safe. So people learn to avoid it, to soften it, or to choose silence so everything can keep moving along. But for Pisces, when the timing is right, truth arrives differently. It doesn't rush in, it doesn't overwhelm, it simply stays, quietly present, long enough that you can no longer ignore it. Truth doesn't come with accusations. It doesn't ask why you did what you did. It asks just one simple question. Does this still fit the person you're becoming? And within that question, there is a great deal of freedom, because not everything that's revealed asks you to give something up. Some truths simply close uncertain spaces that have been left open for far too long. Spaces that kept you guessing, kept you hoping, kept you convincing yourself that things would eventually work out. When uncertainty closes, you don't lose hope. You simply stop spending energy on what was never clear to begin with. Yet that truth also has a gentle way of returning choice back to you. The choice to stay or to walk away. The choice to continue or to pause. The choice to say, enough, without needing to explain yourself over and over again. And Pisces. Having a choice is a form of freedom you deserve. There are moments when you realize you stayed in a situation not because it was good for you, but because you couldn't see clearly enough to leave. When truth appears, it doesn't push you out of familiar ground. It simply turns on the light and lets you decide. Clarity doesn't always feel comfortable right away, but it brings something deeper. Respect. First and foremost, the respect you offer yourself. That respect says your emotions matter, your boundaries matter, and what you feel doesn't need to be minimized. Fairness, at its deepest level, and it isn't about who's right or who's wrong. It's about no longer deceiving yourself, just to keep things calm on the outside, while feeling increasingly drained on the inside. Sometimes, fairness is simply naming your emotions honestly, admitting that something isn't okay anymore, and allowing yourself to face that truth without self-blame, without judgment. Truth doesn't come to punish Pisces, it comes to untangle, to release you from cycles of uncertainty, to help you move forward with lighter hands and a heart no longer carrying unanswered questions. And from this point on, a new foundation begins to form, a foundation of clarity where the steps ahead are no longer built on illusion, but on a quiet, gentle honesty with yourself. After truth brings clarity, Pisces begins to touch a lesson that is subtle, yet deeply important. You were not born to carry everyone else's emotions on your shoulders. For a long time, you may have believed that if you understood deeply enough, things would soften. If you were patient enough, conflict would dissolve on its own. If you stayed a little longer, others would be okay. And sometimes, that was true. Your presence became a place of refuge for many. People leaned on you, found calm around you. But because of that, you grew used to carrying extra weight, standing in the middle, smoothing things over, adjusting your own emotions so no one else would feel uncomfortable. This phase doesn't dismiss everything you've done. It simply asks a gentler question. What about your feelings? You begin to realize that some sadness doesn't belong to you. Some reactions were never caused by you. And some people need to face their own emotions rather than placing them in your hands. This doesn't make you cold. It simply makes you more honest about your limits. You learn how to understand without sacrificing yourself, to listen without rushing to fix, to be present without carrying what isn't yours. Empathy no longer means endurance. You can still care without ignoring your own exhaustion. You can still love without turning yourself into a container for emotions others haven't processed. Pisces. There is a profound difference between supporting someone and losing yourself in the process. And this phase helps you feel that difference not through theory, but through real experience. You begin to allow yourself to say, I need some time. You allow yourself to step back when things feel overwhelming. You allow yourself not to respond immediately, not to explain everything, not because you don't care, but because you're learning where your care truly belongs. When you stop carrying responsibility for everyone else's emotions, you create space for each person to grow on their own. You stop unintentionally blocking their journey with quiet self-sacrifice. And more importantly, you begin to stand firmly in your own gentleness. This gentleness isn't fragile. It has structure. It has boundaries. It carries self-respect. You don't need to become hard to be respected. You only need to show up aligned with your values. When you do, the relationships that remain in your life begin to form around balance, not endurance. The lesson of emotional responsibility doesn't arrive to make you withdraw. It arrives to help you open your heart in a safer way, a deeper way, a more sustainable way. And from here, Pisces begins to sense a new kind of peace, the peace of knowing you can love deeply and still remain whole. Pisces once lived for a long time in the world of what if. What if they understood you better? What if things had unfolded just a little differently? What if the timing had been right, the circumstances gentler, the words chosen more carefully? That world once helped you survive. It gave you hope. It gave you the sense that if you waited longer, if you were patient enough, everything might eventually rearrange itself. But in this phase, a very subtle shift takes place inside you. You no longer want to live inside stories that haven't happened. You begin to look directly at what's actually here. Not because you've stopped dreaming. Pisces will always have a rich imagination. That's part of who you are. The difference is this. You've grown enough to realize that imagination can't replace truth. Clarity doesn't sparkle the way hope does. It doesn't make your heart race right away, but it offers something deeper, a sense of steadiness. When you choose to look at what is, you stop asking why someone didn't become the version you imagined. You stop trying to read between lines that were never written. You stop waiting for a signal that may never arrive. Instead, you begin to observe. You notice how you feel inside a specific situation. You notice how your body reacts when you have to keep explaining yourself. You notice how much energy remains after you try to hold everything together. These observations don't pass judgment. They simply provide information. And that information, when met with honesty, becomes the foundation for peace. Pisces. Peace doesn't come from everything turning out the way you hoped. It comes from no longer convincing yourself that everything is fine, while slowly growing exhausted on the inside. Clarity helps you stop at the right moment, before making more promises, before continuing to sacrifice, before trading your inner calm for a vague possibility. You no longer need every answer. You don't need to understand everyone else's motives. You don't need to decode every action, every pause. What you're seeking now is honesty. Honesty with your emotions, honesty with your limits, honesty about what nourishes you and what quietly drains you. When you allow clarity to enter, some illusions leave on their own, not through dramatic loss, but through genuine relief. You begin to feel less tangled, you question less, you get caught less often in old mental loops, and in that new space, you have more energy for what's actually present. Relationships that respond, choices that feel aligned, moments that don't require constant explanation. Choosing clarity doesn't turn Pisces cold. It simply allows you to love in a more sustainable way. A way of loving that doesn't depend on assumptions. A way of living that doesn't rely on formless hope. And from here on, the road ahead is no longer guided by what if, but by respect for the present moment. That's when Pisces realizes this. The deepest peace arrives when you accept what's true and move forward with your feet firmly on the ground, while your heart remains as soft as it's always been. When you choose clarity, something very subtle begins to shift around you. Not in a dramatic way, not through obvious signs, but through small movements, just enough that you can no longer distract yourself. Some things are revealed not to create chaos, but to bring long-running cycles to an end. Cycles that kept pulling you back to the same feeling, the same question, the same familiar exhaustion. For Pisces, this kind of protection rarely arrives as a warning. It feels more like a door closing softly, an option that no longer works the way it once did, a situation that asks you to stop and look directly at what's in front of you. You realize you can't keep playing the familiar role. You can't keep explaining for others. You can't keep covering up what has already become clear. The universe doesn't need to raise its voice. It simply places you where pretending no longer works. And when that thin layer of fog dissolves, you see more clearly the path you're standing on. At first, this can feel unsettling, not because you're weak, but because you've grown used to moving on old momentum. When that momentum stops, you're asked to move forward with awareness. And in that exact moment, a deeper kind of protection appears. You're no longer pulled back into conversations with no response, no longer drawn into promises without form, no longer guessing intentions, feelings, or the future. Not because everything suddenly becomes perfect, but because you're no longer staying in places that quietly drain you. Pisces. This silent protection doesn't take away your softness. It simply gives that softness a place to stand, a foundation, a sense of worth. You begin to realize your value doesn't need to be proven. It doesn't need persuasion. It doesn't need to be earned through sacrifice. What leaves during this phase doesn't leave because you weren't enough. It leaves because you no longer fit old structures. And what remains because there is mutual respect, because there is real listening, because there is safety that doesn't require a trade-off. When the universe brings you to a necessary pause, you learn to trust that not every ending is a loss. Some are simply rearrangements, so you don't keep repeating lessons you've already outgrown. The moment you stop chasing what no longer belongs to you, you begin living closer to your core values. Not the values that sound good out loud, but the ones reflected in daily choices. You choose honesty over convenience. You choose peace over uncertain narratives. You choose full presence instead of surviving inside old roles. And Pisces, when you stand in that place, you don't need the universe to prove anything. The fact that you no longer have to pretend is already a very real form of protection. If lately you've noticed that the rhythm of your life feels a bit more serious, not in a heavy way, but in a way that makes you think more carefully before each choice, then you're not alone. If decisions no longer come from old habits, if you find yourself weighing what truly fits and what's only temporary, that isn't a sign of hesitation. It's a sign of readiness. And if your intuition feels sharper, yet paired with an unusual calm, no urgency, no panic, just a quiet certainty rising from within, then perhaps you're entering a different phase of yourself. This phase doesn't ask you to prove anything. It doesn't demand rapid change. And it doesn't place grand promises in front of you. It simply invites you to slow down a little, so you can see that what's unfolding isn't meant to hold you back, but to help you walk forward with steadier footing. When we say you're being upgraded, it doesn't mean you were ever lacking. It simply means you're ready for a new level of awareness, one where you no longer have to trade inner peace just to keep everything looking fine on the outside. What's gradually being revealed during this time isn't here to take anything away from you. It comes to return what may have been overlooked: emotional autonomy, respect for your personal boundaries, and enough inner space to take a deep breath. You may notice you're no longer trying to fit in at all costs. It's no longer over-adjusting to avoid disruption, no longer explaining yourself endlessly for what you feel. And that doesn't make you distant. It allows you to be present more honestly, with others, and with yourself. Pisces. When you choose to live in alignment with your inner truth, life doesn't suddenly become perfect, but it becomes fairer in a way that's uniquely yours. You invest energy where there is response. You stay in connections built on mutual respect. You make choices from understanding, not from pressure or vague expectations. And from there, you begin to sense a kind of peace that doesn't require constant effort. It stays because you've made enough room for it to exist. If there's one thing worth carrying with you after this video, it isn't a ready-made answer, it's permission. Permission to live more honestly, more selectively, and to be gentle with yourself in a way that lasts. Let each next step be guided not by the fear of missing out, but by respect for the person you are becoming. And when you do that, the world around you begins to adjust as well, quietly, without display, simply fitting you better than before.